Welcome to the Ring of Fire podcast, where we gather to ignite creative inspiration. Today on episode 3, I welcome special guest Darrell St.Blaine. Darrell is one of those people who sees creative opportunity everywhere. He's a professional fire dancer, a musician, a composer, a photographer, videographer, and an animator. Today's conversation is sure to be illuminating and full of wonderful insight and creative inspiration. Please be sure to like this podcast as well as share this content with anyone who you think might benefit from hearing this conversation today, as well as share your comments and share what insights come to you through today's conversation. Let's go ahead and dive into this conversation today with Darrell St.Blaine. Welcome, Darrell, to the Ring of Fire podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and jump in here and see where this conversation is going to go today as we dive into looking where we can ignite creative inspiration and or find places where creative inspiration is waiting to be ignited. My question, the burning question that I have for you, Darrell, is how did you get into fire dancing?
It's probably a genetic thing. My sister and I were always pyros when we were kids, lighting things on fire with magnifying glasses, but that's nothing special. No, actually, it's just right place, right time, was at an event. It was like a big event for the last full solar eclipse of the 20th century, which is kind of the cool thing about the story, right? Solar eclipse, fire dancing. But regardless, they had some fire dancers there. And my partner and I at the time just both were mesmerized by it. We're just like, oh my God, the sound of the fire and being just, 10 feet away from it was a very different experience than watching it on TV. And then I suppose the other kind of magical part about it was that a week later, we ran into another fire dancer at a friend's birthday party. And it just kind of felt like our destiny kept throwing fire in our path. And we were happy to go along with it. We got into it, started meeting more people. In 99, it was still pretty counterculture. It was still kind of a new element of the local San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland kind of counterculture. It was still very kind of industrial. A lot of the people in it at the time were kind of into dark industrial music. So a lot of fire dancers were all in black leather and stuff like that. Which my partner and I, Aaron, we weren't into like the whole dark gothy, black leather thing. So we were a little bit of outliers. We were a little brighter. We actually smiled when we performed. And, we just, I guess it's fair to say, use the word obsessed. We just got obsessed with it. It was just our favorite thing to do. We had day jobs at the time, but, after in the afternoon, we take afternoon breaks even and just like go out and spin in the park for half an hour before running back to our day jobs and meeting up with friends at night to spin in the park. And it just progressed. We kept doing it. People started asking us to show up at their events. People started offering to let us into their raves for free and give us some money for our fuel. And then we got busy enough that people started offering us money to come to their event rather than go to the other free event, and it just bloomed from there. Eventually we quit our day jobs and just performed for a living. Pretty cool way to make a living, I got to admit.
I'm curious, so the fire drew you in, seeing the fire mesmerized you and drew you in. Was there a particular, other than the fire, because fire has all the props that go with it. Was there some other element that really attracted you to it other than the fire part?
Well, I've always been a performer, even since I was a kid. I mean, long before I got into fire, I was a musical performer, played in bands, play the guitar, play the piano, sing songs, write songs. So the thrill of being up in front of an audience, hopefully an appreciative audience, I just always loved that experience. And fire was just great because even when I was still learning and just had kind of some basics down, the fire is spectacular enough that people paid attention, and I got a lot of positive feedback because of it. Aside from it just being a new form of performance, I gotta say the thing that I really remember that I loved the sound of it. In fact, when I first got started, poi is still super duper popular. It seems like there are always more poi spinners than stick spinners, and back then that was especially true. And I tried my hand at poi. I maybe I had a low pain tolerance. I just didn't. I hit myself all the time with poi. I was much happier with a stick. I mean, you can hit yourself with a stick also, but the stick just made more sense to me. But a big part of why I like sticks is because you can start them really fast and you can stop them really fast. And aside from the visual impact of that, there's the sound. Like the sound of those big 4-inch wicks at the end of a stick spinning around, it's pretty noisy. And typically we performed loud music, so it's not so obvious. But when you're the performer, the sound is very much a part of the experience. And with a stick, I had a lot of control and influence over that sound, how fast I spun it. And with the poi, I found I had, you can't just stop poi instantly. Probably there are some people good enough to stall that quickly, but certainly I wasn't that good with it. So the sound was part of what I fell in love with. Even when we were just practicing without music, I was always kind of making my own music with the sound of the fire.
That's a beautiful connection to have made there, because yeah, that sound has a very hypnotic,
Hmm.
textured component to it. And as a dancer, I also remember connecting in with that sound and feeling like the pattern and the rhythm as like the sound moved around. And I know for beginning students, sometimes that can be frightening, actually. The sound can startle
Yeah,
them and throw them
yeah.
off. But I love that you were, a musician and a performer and had done the band scene. And then what really drew you into the fire was at first the fire, the visual component of it. But then when you started doing it, it was the sound and the rhythm that went with it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I can't help, because with the performing part of it, that is definitely, I've learned a lot from you about performing. I think, you're a phenomenal performer. And just I like when we were in Japan, I remember just like we all had to work our tushies off, like performing those solo shows for, whatever it was, 15 minutes or something. And we were up there
Yeah.
huffing it and like going for it, 8 times a day. And you walked out with a fire eating torch and you had more of a crowd. And it was just, and I was just like, wow. I remember thinking like Darrell could perform with a pencil and actually like impress the audience. Like, he's a really good performer. Yeah.
Well, sometimes less is more. I mean,
Yeah. So I love that the two components, the sound and the performing, came together with the fire to be, what involved you for over, 20 years, what kind of became your job, your career, your passion, your creative inspiration. When you think about that entire process, like all the places that you've been, everywhere you've went with fire dancing, what have been some of the highlight moments, the moments where you just were like, I cannot believe this is my life?
oh yeah. Um, well, the first one that just popped into my head was a show pretty early in my career, around 2005 maybe. I was in Bermuda, and it was this big street festival. Pretty much everybody on the island came downtown for this big festival, and there was also a big cruise ship in the harbor. So like all those hundreds or maybe even thousands of people off of that boat were down on the street, and they had the stage set up right at the T intersection of the two biggest streets. And we went on stage, and the lights on stage came down as soon as we lit the fire, right? Because the fire looks better in the dark. But they also had lights pointed out at the audience. And the music, one of the first big bangs in the music, they lit up the audience. And I don't know how many people there were out there, but it shocked me. It was certainly the largest audience up to that point that I'd ever performed in front of. And it was just startling. And I think I wouldn't say that I lost the beat of my performance, but I know my heart kind of skipped a beat there. And I jumped back in and we finished the show. And then afterwards in the hotel room that night, we were kind of talking about it. And a bunch of us all had that same feeling. One person was facing in the wrong direction and she missed it. And I felt bad about that because that was an early peak moment. I remember when I was playing in bands back in the 90s, the largest audience I played for was maybe, I don't know, 800 people or something. And like, oh, that was a peak moment, It was 1995 and I played in front of, hundreds of people. And then that moment in Bermuda, suddenly realizing what it looks like to have thousands of eyes pointed in your direction. It was interesting and a really interesting emotional impact. Though I will say I've had a couple of moments like that with big audiences, but it also gave me a context to really appreciate how much I love performing up close for small audiences, to be able to look people in the eye, right? Because humans have that ability to connect with their eyes. You're looking in someone's eyes, that they're looking in your eyes. And even if you go from person to person to person, making that connection, that is something you can't do on a stage 50 feet away from the audience. And I do love being up close. Like, if you give me a choice between doing a dozen small shows up close to the audience and one big show in front of a giant audience, money aside, I would probably choose the smaller shows.
And it's also that one thing, especially like the fire eating, allowing you to go up close to the
Mm.
audience, and
Mm-hmm.
you could perform the most epic, huge show with like pyrotechnics and like all the people and all the psh, psh going on. And then you can go up close to the audience with fire eating. And at the end of the show, what everybody is going to ask is about the person that did the fire eating that was up close to them. That's the one thing they're going to remember. And I know
Yep.
several of the shows I've done with you, like in Oregon, that having that experience where it was just like all this stuff going on in the three stages and all the people, and then at the end it was like, how'd that guy put that fire in his mouth, like what is he doing? And it's so that those are the really impactful moments where we break beyond the third wall and are able to get close to people. And it sounds to me like for you, it was thrilling to have that big experience with all of the people, but that more personal up close interaction has more meaning to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe even so much as to say, if all I'd ever done were big stage shows, I'm not sure I would have lasted um, as a fire dancer. Because, like I said, my favorite thing is really working up close and seeing the emotional response of the people. Because fire is primal. I mean, fire is scary. It's maybe fair to say if your mother did her job, she taught you to be afraid of fire. And most people certainly have a healthy respect for it, which is good and healthy. And then they see somebody do what we do, and we understand fire and combustion, what you can do and what you can't, which is a lot more granular than what most people think they understand about fire. And when I light my hand on fire right in front of, feet in front of someone's nose, and they see there's no trick to it. It's just, that's my hand, and is it real fire? Of course it is. like it changes a little bit of their reality. They suddenly realize that here's one thing that they thought they knew that they didn't, and it sparks that part of their mind that makes them want to know. Not everybody, some people, it's not, everybody's thing. But I love seeing the curiosity pop up in people's eyes and like, well, how is that possible? Because I can relate to it. I remember the first time, well, I don't remember the first time I actually watched somebody light their hand on their own hand on fire, but I remember learning how to do it. I'm just like, I saw that guy do it and I'm going to do it because I want to add that to my show. And I'm grabbing the wick of my staff and using an eating torch and all these sorts of things. And I couldn't do it. It just hurt too bad. It was too freaky. It was too weird. I was just like, how is this even possible? And then I realized that, yeah, it does actually hurt a little bit, but I'm not getting burned. If you do it right, you use the right kind of fuel. And there was this learning process. And that was a great experience for me, not just because I was able to learn how to do this cool thing that I could perform with, but it also just taught me that my expectations are oftentimes inaccurate. Um, and it's good to try things. It's good to think you know something and try it anyway, just to see if maybe there's something to be learned there.
It's magic, but it isn't magic because there is, like
Right.
with fire, this very small, short little interval of time where if we're, like you said, do it the right way, use the right fuel, that there's a way to do something that can be done in a relatively safe way. It's like if,
Hmm.
I teach my fire safety students that it's like if you're going to react and like it's going to go to bad really fast. But if you can be calm and respond in this short little fraction of time, then it's actually going to be fine. I'm hearing you talk about, the performing and the fire and the art of it. And, it's like all artists have a medium through which their creativity flows. And so for you, the fire has been a medium through which your creativity flows, but there's other mediums through which your creativity flows as well. Can you talk about yourself as an artist a little bit and how you experience that creative energy that moves through you?
Yeah, I mentioned that even since I was a kid, I was fascinated by music and I learned to play musical instruments. I learned the excitement and the joy of being in front of a group of people. And I think what it all has in common is you have to be present and you have to be open to, I don't want to say chaos, but innumerable possibilities. Let's just take public speaking, for example, because I think that was actually personally, my first big breakthrough. I was in the sixth grade and actually maybe just starting to come out of my shell a little bit. I remember being a very shy kid in the fourth grade. But in the sixth grade, we had to give oral reports, and my subject was Greek mythology. And I was a little nerd. Like in the sixth grade, Greek mythology was my favorite thing, and I'd read all the stories, and I'd read different versions of the stories, and I knew all the names of the gods, both the Greek versions and the Roman versions. I was a little nerd, and I was excited about it. And I got up in front of my class, all these kids that I knew very well. I had the same class of kids for 3 years, so 3 years is a long time to get to know these people. There was no hesitation. I had the opportunity to geek out about something that I loved in front of people that I knew and trusted. And I just ran with it. And I had a great time. And I got very positive feedback, from the class and from my teacher. I think my teacher was surprised by how comfortable I was because, as I recall, and probably true of most sixth graders, probably true of most people, not comfortable standing up by yourself in front of a bunch of eyeballs looking at you. Um, and that was just a huge pivot point for me. And then going into junior high school and the teen years where everything is changing and it's really easy to be uncomfortable and insecure, that ended up being a very safe place for me, surprisingly, to stand up in front of people and be myself. And of course, it's better if I had an idea what I was doing. Like if I knew the song that I was going to perform, I'd be good. If I knew the topic I was going to be talking about, that'd be good. But the more I did it, the more comfortable I became with just whatever came up. Being able to react, whether it was talking with somebody in front of a group of people, doing an interview, for example, or answering questions, that I had no idea what the questions might be. I found that well, it's not even just that I found a flow state, it's almost just that I would fall into a flow state in front of a group of people. And if you're familiar with flow state, you know that it's a pretty nice place to be. It can be very jarring when you're yanked out of it, and there are times I almost fell off a stage one time and had a problem getting back into that, state, into that present moment, and stop worrying about my feet and whether it might happen again or why it happened and all that sort of stuff. But being in that place, and it's not just a performance thing either. So I'm a songwriter, and actually writing songs is one of my favorite things and one of the hardest things that I do. It can be incredibly frustrating, but it can also just be a gift when I'm sitting there noodling around with the musical possibilities and all of a sudden these pieces come together. It's like playing with Legos and not having a plan necessarily of what you're building, but all of a sudden the blocks just kind of beg to be placed in a particular way. It's kind of magical. A lot of famous composers or artists in general have made statements similar to the fact of, I am just a conduit, whether it's I'm a conduit for God's creations or I'm a conduit for the universe. And there's that feeling that something is flowing through you and creating something that you find intriguing or beautiful or amazing or whatever. It's just a gift is the way it feels. And this is also why it can be really frustrating, right? Because you come to expect things like, oh, I'm just going to sit down here at my piano and something fabulous is going to happen. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes I sit down at my piano for the third time in a row and still nothing is flowing. And, it's easy to feel kind of abandoned by the universe or whatever, because I might be stretching in a direction that is new and different to me. And a lot of my instincts are not quite as developed in this area. I don't write a lot of ballads, for example. And when I do sit down and something is just kind of wants to be a ballad and I start working in that direction, it's not as an intuitive experience. So it requires a little more patience and a little more willingness. I like to think of it as my muse, common a common idea that I have a muse that is actually what brings me these ideas. And sometimes I have to woo her, and sometimes she turns me down. Sometimes I invite her into my space and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm washing my hair tonight. And sometimes she just doesn't even pick up the phone, and that's par for the course. But when we do get together and create something, it's usually a very enjoyable process. Even if it doesn't turn into something that I share with other people, it's still something that just feeds me the experience.
What are some of the ways that help you get and tap into the flow states? What are some of the ways I heard you say woo the muse a little bit, and to me that makes me think of like getting into the flow state almost. So what are some ways as as an artist, as a musician, as a creator, what are some ways that you have found to invoke that space?
Well, showing up is the first step. I'm not somebody who gets grand ideas when I'm just driving along in my car. Sometimes in the shower, I will admit, like hot water pelting me is a great way to get into a very receptive state. But when I mean showing up, talk about music, sit down at the piano. It's right here. It's in my front room. I can sit down anytime, but there are times that I don't. And if I don't at least sit down and show up and start making some noise with the piano, well, I know nothing's going to come to me. I'm not somebody who gets music out of nowhere. I really do have to show up and do my part. With fire dancing, when it comes to like coming up with a new move or working with different music and figuring out what kind of choreography to do with it, there is an initial stage, which is kind of going through the motion. I mean, that's a form of showing up. I get out there, I move to the music. A lot of times I would just start moving. I'm more of a dancer than a spinner, like there are people in the flow arts who place their feet and then it's all in their hands and arms. And some of what those kinds of performers do is amazing. It's almost to me, more of a magic trick because it's just inconceivable what they're doing. But I'm much more of a move around and dance on stage with the fire. Like, I never do a solo show. It's always a duet because it's always at least me and the fire. And the fire is more fun when you're dancing around with it, instead of just spinning it. So as far as inspiring the creative moment, the flow state, I just start moving through it. Some people refer to it as warming up, and that can be part of it too. You're kind of warming up your body. You're warming up your creativity. I'm warming up my hands at the piano keyboard. But then there comes a moment or a point where you kind of have to relax into it. When you're on a timeline, if I have a project, if I'm doing some music for somebody else's film, if I'm working on choreography for a show that is this weekend, whatever it might be, I'm on somebody else's timeline, there can be the urge to just try and force it. We're going to force it. We're going to work on it. We're going to do it right now. We're going to make the decisions. We're going to be done. And depending on what you're trying to do, sometimes that can work. But if what you're trying to do is find flow state and let creativity kind of blossom in you, or at least for me, there's a kind of relaxation that's required. I used to study martial arts with great grandmaster Taeyeon Kim. And one of the funniest things she ever said to me was, try harder to relax. And she was being ironic, of course, but it cracked me up. But it made me realize, she was trying to get us to relax and to flow. And we were all tensing up. I was tensing up and trying to like hit the poses exactly. And it becomes counterproductive. Flow, just that word, flow state, undoubtedly those two words are used to describe that condition because it feels things are just flowing. There aren't sharp corners to it. It's not so much about decision making as it is reacting to what you're feeling and what's coming to you and what's around you. Mm-hmm. And it's surprising. It's like meditation. I think anybody who's tried or is new to meditation knows how challenging it can be to be that calm and that relaxed. And your busy mind always wants to creep in and your body is complaining and all these sorts of little things that you start to become really aware of. And you've got to learn to let those go and find that place. It's not always a comfortable place, but it's a place where it's not so much about control and it's not so much about decision making. It's about acceptance and reception.
And it sounds like also allowing the self to sit in that uncomfortable space long enough for the flow, the creativity to come through. And sometimes, from my experience, that can feel like an eternity and it can feel very frustrating. Yeah. When it's flowing and the creativity is there, it feels great. And it's like, this is exactly who I am. And this is the way. And then all of a sudden it's like, right? And
Hmm.
block, there's a wall, or there's the trying, or there's all of it. So have you experienced prolonged stages of like showing up and then just it's not flowing, it's not flowing, it's not flowing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you do? What happens when that, what do you do in your life when, as a creative person, what do you do in your life to work with that?
Well, one thing, some creative types, I love that phrase, creative types. Some people thrive in adversity. Uh, there are plenty of examples of painters and musicians who everybody agrees did their greatest work when they were just tormented and tortured by whatever was happening in their heads or in their lives. I'm not one of those people. Um, when I'm having a tough time, whether, it's my relationships or other aspect of my life, finding creativity is a struggle. Um, and I've come to recognize this. And, we don't always, very rarely have control over our situation. We have influence over the world around us. Um, and we have the ability to decide how to react to it. So in those times when I've been really dry, I've been really stressed, I've been unhappy, I've not been creative, and that's a spiral, right? That's a negative spiral because I'm already unhappy about something, and then maybe I sit down at the piano or I pick up my fire staff and I'm just not experiencing joy, then that's just one more thing to be unhappy about, right? And I can get pretty spirally into this isn't working. This is just making me even less happier than I was, blah, 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 blah. I really need to kind of step back and not try to use creativity as a crutch. I have to address the things in my life which are not going well. Um, I, what was it? About 2 years ago, I had some health problems, and I really had to kind of put down my creative process and address what it was, how to go about living in the body that I was living in at the time, and to stop fighting against it, and obviously try to find a healthier way to be. But I kind of had to come to grips with who I was at that time in that moment. And then once I was able to do that, not only did my health actually start to improve, but my creative process started knocking at the door again. And I did a lot of writing. I made a lot of notes about lyrical ideas or even thematic elements for performing. But they were just little seeds, little kernels. But I kept those, and when that creative flow became available to me again, some of those, I was able to nurture into ideas that became songs or that became a particular kind of performance. So I guess what it all comes down to for me is being aware of where I'm at, either in my head or in my body or in this world. And if I can stay aware of how things are affecting me, then I can better choose how I want to navigate it. But as far as letting the world around me control me and then turning that angst or that joy or whatever it is into art, that has not been something I've been successful at. Like, I have to find my place in the maelstrom or in the doldrums or whatever it is before I'm able to effectively invite the muse in. My muse isn't really interested in helping me out when I'm unhappy. She's maybe a bit of a fair weather friend in that regard. Um, but that's what I found I need, what works for me.
Yeah, and how did you, because you have a really intelligent or emotionally intelligent, like self-aware self-awareness when it's surrounding what you need around your creativity and when to step back and when to be there. How did you develop that keen sense of knowing? Because, some people, their creativity, they can be really creative, but it can be this like, maybe their creativity isn't flowing and they haven't made that connection. So how did you come to that awareness within yourself?
By beating myself up a lot, by
Hitting yourself with boy? No.
well, yeah, that too. No, creatively, well, by trying a lot of different things. The times that I found myself feeling disappointed in myself. Um, well, someone I'm not sure if this is true. Supposedly, it's a Albert Einstein quote that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. And regardless of who said that or not, that is so meaningful to me because I will find myself, sitting down doing something again and again because in the past it worked. In the past, it got me to a place that I wanted to be, and today in the present, it's not working. So I try not to get stuck in that cycle for too long. If something that used to work is no longer working, then I start looking for something different. Sometimes it's a matter of shocking myself in some way. Sometimes it's a matter of simply exposing myself to something new and different and unexpected, or looking for the unexpected in the expected. We tend to, there's a part of our brain that's like, oh, I know what that is, I know what that is, I know what that is. I think it's called the default mode network, that part of your brain whose job it is to catalog, this is safe, that's dangerous, this is known, that's unknown, and we form these expectations. It allows us to go through life without having to consider the same thing again and again and again and again. I know that when I grab my doorknob, I turn it to the left and that opens the door. I've learned that. I don't have to think about it. The reason I use this example is because just recently I turned the doorknob on my front door to the right and the whole thing came apart. And that was not expected. I was really surprised by that, but I'm glad that I did it because it turns out my doorknob was not safe. Anybody could have just done that and broken into my house. But that was an example of how I just kind of randomly tried something different, and what happened was not expected, and it was a good lesson. Not necessarily a creative example, but it's as in a creative example, as a creative example of something similar. I sat down at my piano recently, and I was playing through some of the music that I know and thinking about, my right hand and my left hand, they've kind of settled into a style. And trying to play with my right hand what I play with my left hand was surprisingly difficult, and then vice versa, using my left hand instead of my right hand. And it was not just because my thumbs are on the opposite sides, it was literally because the part of me that controls those hands instinctively, it was just different. My hands had different personalities, and I started to realize a great way to expand my capacity, my creative capacity, would be to start moving outside of those expected roles with my right and my left hand. And I sat down and I read a little bit about it. And I'm not the first person to consider this. And some great composers did really wacky things. I don't remember who it was. It might have been Liszt. Anyway, there was a story about a famous classical composer who was one of those rare wealthy musicians, and he actually paid somebody to build him a harpsichord that was inverted, so the low notes were on the right side and the high notes were on the left side. Now, of course, nowadays you could do that with a synthesizer pretty easily, but it would be a very different experience playing that instrument. I remember when I was coming up in fire dancing, like I said, I tried poi, and it just wasn't speaking to me. I didn't, And so I really focused on the long staff for a long time. That was kind of my thing. And then I got into double staff, and you can do, it's like two sticks, right? You spin one stick. Now I've got two sticks, and I can spin them both and do a prop spin or whatever, but I can move my hands. But there are also very different things that you can do with two sticks than just one stick because they're smaller and all this sort of stuff. And it frees up possibilities. Look for the unexpected. We tend to start with the expected, and then recognizing I'm doing what I'm expecting of myself. What's something that I don't expect from myself? Can I do it with my eyes closed? Can I ask somebody else for an idea? Can I watch somebody else for an idea? Can I see something in nature that somehow sparks an idea? I mean, nature is a great place to find ideas because whether we realize it or not, most of what we consider human inventions and civilizations, in one way or another, we've copied nature. And then if you can kind of go back to that origin of the idea, oftentimes you'll see that, the copied version that's come to you is just this little splinter of what nature does with this idea. With visual arts, like nature's a great place to study spirals. There are so many spirals in nature. In visual arts, if you want to start exploring that, like plants are just a great place to pay attention to.
Yeah, I love what you shared here. And what I heard with a lot of it was pattern interrupt, like,
Mm,
like the presence of being aware of, you could go turn your doorknob left every time. And there's a point where in the beginning, maybe we're thinking about that, but then eventually we're not, we're just doing it, doing it, doing it. So we have to be aware. Oh, wait, I'm doing this all the time. Be aware of the pattern, and then
hmm
we can see ways that we can start to interrupt it and break it. And actually, this is why I love poi so much, is because I haven't really seen anything else in the world that shows and teaches a somatically an embodied way of really recognizing patterns, directions, planes in a way, and then giving an opportunity to reprogram neural pathways and be able to recognize how we're naturally doing something, or and be able to track it differently. So that's actually for me what I'd say geeked out on with like the whole fire dancing point world was that. And
yeah.
but that's what I heard you say with a lot of that, is pattern, like recognizing patterns and then seeing ways that you can change those patterns. And even thinking about a spiral, when we get into like the dimensional geometry of it a little bit, we might think that the spiral is going this way or going this way or going this way or going this way. But then I always challenge to say, well, how else could it go? Right? Because we
Mhm.
think in these very basic, and we might say, well, there are only so many ways it can go because we're in this dimension and it can only go this way and that way. And then like when we start meditating on it and thinking about it, we realize like, whoa, I never even realized how it could, shift or change itself in a particular way. And so I'm hearing for you that with your creativity, that is one way when you're feeling a block, is it's like step back, and then it's recognize patterns, like get present, recognize patterns, and then start to look around you for uh either confirmations of or like inspiration as to how you can shift it or think differently or examine it from a different perspective, and then seeing if that
Mhm.
helps move the energy where it starts to flow again a little bit. Am I understanding you correct?
Yeah, yeah. I like that phrase, pattern interruption, um, because we get into our patterns, we get into our habits, we get stuck in a rut. I love that expression. Um, and there are so many examples around us that we just tune out, that we don't pay attention to. And this isn't just another example that kind of popped into my head. I'm also a videographer, and there are times that I might be watching, a movie, a professionally made work of cinema, And there are times that my brain lapses into oh, look what the cameraman did there. Look at the way, he moved the perspective in sync with the emotion that we're trying to convey. And, as a way of imitating, like, oh, I like what he did there. I'm going to put that in the back of my head. But there are also times I try to notice things and I'd be like, well, why did he do that? I don't like it. I would have done it differently. Okay, and that's fair. That's an example of, our artistic individuality. But then that's an example, or that's an opportunity for me to recognize, okay, I would have done it differently, kind of implies a pattern. That's the way I think I would have done it differently. If I look at how that camera person chose to do it, that director or whatever, and stop and think, maybe I'm missing something. Like, what did they accomplish that my approach would not have accomplished? And maybe I don't find anything. And maybe that just reaffirms that, I kind of like the way that I would have approached this situation. But other times, the example I'm thinking of, I was watching this scene and the camera was moving and I expected it to go up into this boom shot. And it all of a sudden did this huge pullback. And at first it didn't seem like it suited the scene to me. But then 3 seconds later, I understood what they were doing, right? My expectation was like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. But then when I was just a little patient and then I paid attention to what happened and I paid attention to the effect that it had on the art that they were creating, then I was like, oh, I'm not sure I could ever do that in the sort of, productions that I do. But I like that thinking outside the box sort of thing that they did. And
Mhm.
instead of just stopping at the whole, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, it was really interesting to just let myself consider, why did they do it that way? And what did it accomplish? And is that an idea that I can let influence me one way or the other? Because sometimes you see things that people do and you're like, note to self, don't hit yourself on the head with a flaming stick. All right, that's a good lesson.
Right.
um, Though that's also a funny example because I knew a guy who shaved his head and he used to light his head on fire, do a fire mohawk, and that was part of his shtick. So there's an example of the don't light your head on fire, that's a bad idea, actually can be a good idea, just depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, and I like that because the first reaction of, oh, I don't like the way that they did that, or that's not a good idea, kind of then it blocks it and then it just
Hmm.
puts us right back into our groove. Whereas it's like, and that's okay, but then pulling and saying, wait a minute, like I just noticed that I had that reaction, that I blocked it, that I said, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that. And then to catch ourselves and say, okay, wait, like, what are they doing? Let's look at it. Let's see what's the effect and kind of explore this a little deeper, then can sometimes be the doorway that opens up into moving the lever just a little bit so that the flow starts happening, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Or like improv, people like to say, like when you're improving on stage, you never say no. You don't shut it down. You say yes, and you move it ahead, and there's a degree of acceptance which allows you to see what comes next,
Yeah.
and opening yourself to possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, I resonate with that because honestly, my natural way has been more of a ecstatic, in the moment, go with the flow sort of way of doing things. But it drove the performers nuts in the beginning because I didn't count. I was just like totally spontaneous, and everybody wanted these very structured grooves,
Mm.
choreographies, and pathways to give everybody. And I fought it and fought it. And then I eventually did make choreographies and found I actually I was a little blocked towards the choreography part of it. Honestly, I had my natural way of being in the flow, and I was a
Mhm.
little blocked towards exploring what was creatively possible within this other pathway. And when I went into it, like it opened this whole world for me of like creative choreography and a way of doing choreography that is not normally done, and it created this whole other world. So but it was a growing, it's sometimes in like art or in creativity, it's like growing pains, right? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we're, part of what's blocking us is our growth as an artist. And sometimes that's within a medium. Does it resonate that you feel like you're like an artist at the core, right? You use the word creative type. So is that like, what word really resonates when you feel into yourself as a creative type?
What word? Um, hmm. I mean, I like the word artist because it's become, I don't know, at least in my experience, when I was younger, for some reason I associated the word artist with painters and sculptors. And it feels like during my own career, my own personal growth, artist, or at least the way I've come to understand artist, is it's a larger umbrella. The artist formerly known as Prince. We're all artists. We create the unexpected. We create the beautiful. We create the shocking. It's art because it affects people strongly. And for that reason, someone will love it and someone will hate it because strong emotions, everybody brings a part of themselves to it. So, and I've known people that have a hard time calling themselves artists. Like their inner critics are like, no, you're not an artist, you're not good enough, you're just an amateur or whatever. So the word artist holds a lot of charge for me. Luckily for me, a lot of positive charge. And whenever I encounter somebody who is being creative and being true to themselves in their process, if I ever get the sense that they're like, oh, I'm not an artist or anything like that, I will always make some effort to say, I think you are. This is what you're creating is art. It's surprising, it's amazing, it's beautiful, whatever. I was one time talking to a guy who built custom cars. He would totally redesign the body of the car and change the shape of it and all this sort of stuff, paint them beautiful colors. And somebody called him an artist, and he's like, no, I'm not an artist. I don't like do murals and stuff like that. Because in that community, a lot of those cars have beautiful murals that are airbrushed of, beautiful women or nature or demons or whatever. And in his head, that was art, and what he did was something else. And I kind of butted into the conversation. I was just like, I think this is art. I think this is amazing. Um, and he didn't deny it a second time. And I I don't know. I hope maybe I quieted down his what do you call it? His imposter syndrome, right? Like we all have imposter syndrome. Like, oh, no, I'm not really good enough to perform in front of audience. No, I'm not really good enough to call myself an artist. I'm not really good enough to charge for what I do. Like our imposter syndrome. One of the kindest things I think you can do, one artist to another, one creative person to another, is help foster the belief that you are valid. What you're doing is valid. What you're doing is art. You're not an imposter. Nobody is when
Right.
it
Let's
comes to
talk
art.
about that for just a moment, like imposter syndrome, because this is like this, and this topic right here actually speaks to the artist, but I feel like it's kind of in any field, right? It kind of so many people can experience imposter syndrome, whether they're, like an artist, a musician, a dancer, or working in a completely different field within maybe like even science, or a person who teaches meditation, or a yoga teacher. Like so many people feel this sense of imposter syndrome, and sometimes will go through great extenses to qualify themselves and then still feel like an imposter. What the heck is going on with that with people? Like, what is that about?
I don't know. I'm sure there are like psychologists who have built a career around studying that. I, Speaking for myself, I think a, a big source of fuel for my own feelings of imposter syndrome. came from my mother. My mother, oh my God, I loved my mother. She was a wonderful person, but she was very fearful. She was a fearful person, and she had been, you know, her early ambitions had been stomped on. And unfortunately, she was taught, like, don't bring attention to yourself. Don't make claims of grandeur because people will shoot you down, people will hurt your feelings. And she, trying to protect her children, instilled, she thought she was trying to, like, you know, um, she was trying to teach us to be cautious. Don't let yourself be vulnerable because people will be mean to you and you'll get hurt, right? She didn't want to see her kids get hurt. But she ended up making us feel, and I say us, both my sister and I have talked about this, a little less confident in the things that we felt passionate about. Like, it's important to me, but why would anybody else think it was important? And, the worst thing that can happen is that someone is going to tell you, that you're not good enough, or that, what you're doing is dumb or ugly or whatever. And nobody likes to hear that. But I think that is the big part of what's behind imposter syndrome, is people's fear that they will get negative attention. Because a part of art is putting yourself into something body and soul. I care about this. I'm going to do this. I feel passionate about it. And that's oftentimes where the unexpected and the surprise comes from the audience's point of view, right? Because you care so much about this, you're putting so much of yourself into it, it becomes a unique thing because we are all unique people. If you're overly afraid of the emotional trauma of having somebody be mean to you, having somebody put down this thing that has been so important to you during the creative process, then imposter syndrome is really there to keep you from putting yourself out there and taking a chance. Or if you do put yourself out there, you try to temper it by saying, like, oh, I'm just an amateur. Oh, I was just fooling around. This is just a thing that I did, in the hopes that people will be less likely to stomp on you. Because the truth is that if you put yourself out there with confidence and you say, this is a thing that I did and I'm proud of it, there are unfortunately always people who will, for their own reasons, it's about them, it's not about you, but they will instinctively try to put you down because they'll feel like, oh, well, you're full of yourself. And really what that means is, like, they're not confident. So they're going to put you down because you are displaying confidence. Often, jealousy is about, I don't feel good about myself because I see you doing something that I wish I had the courage to do. And unfortunately, jealousy oftentimes, manifests into trying to limit somebody else, trying to put somebody else down. In reality, because a part of you admires their courage. It seems very contrary, right? And when somebody says something purposefully or not that kind of makes me feel small about what I'm trying to do, I try to remember that. This comment that they made, it says more about them than it does about me, because they don't really understand what this means to me. And that's an important thing. This is kind of a random, this is a bit of tangential, but I just want to say it. As an artist, we should love what we do for ourselves. And we should understand that what we do is going to be taken differently by everybody else who experiences it. Whether it's a dance performance that people are watching, whether it's a song that you write that people listen to, what they perceive is as much about them as it is about what you've created. They bring themselves into that art as they watch it or they listen to it. And you may trigger somebody in a negative way. And it's not that you meant to do that. It's not that their trigger really has anything to do with the concept behind your creation, but you just acknowledge that this person has some background, has some experience, they're getting triggered about it, they're upset about it, maybe they're so freaked out about it that they decide to, attack you or your work in some way. And it's hard not to take that personally, but it's really not about you. You weren't trying to create that effect in this person. Probably you weren't trying to create this effect in that person, but just let it be about them. Because if there is a mortal sin among artists, it's like once you put your art out in the world, you have to let it go. You can't continue to let it be all about you. When you're creating it, when you're making it, when you're giving birth to it, whatever analogy you want to use, it is about you. And that connectedness to it is a big part of what makes it art. But the whole birth and child raising analogy holds true, because there comes a point where you let your kid out into the world and you let them be themselves, interact with the world, and you might feel protective about them, but you have to understand that people are going to treat them the way they treat them, and that's not necessarily a reflection on you or your parenting skills, right? You or your creative artistic skills. Once you have decided that this is a thing, I'm putting it out in the world, you let it go. And if it's, I don't want to say successful necessarily, but the more people that experience it, the more versions of it are out in the world, because everybody's perception of your work is unique. And you have to let their perception be their perception. Love it or hate it, you know? That's one of the reasons I like the definition of art, is that it is something that evokes strong emotion. And some people, it'll be a beautiful, wonderful feeling. And some people, they will hate it. And either way, those are both examples that this thing, this creation, is worthy of the label art, because it affects people. So sorry, just wanted to make that little tangential statement there, because that's an important part, kind of mission statement. That's not right. It's something I feel strongly about.
Well, I think it was perfect, actually, and it was well timed and with the conversation, honestly. And I think it's something that people probably want to hear. And it's just worth actually stating, because I
Mm,
agree with you 100%. And I love the definition of art as being that which invokes strong emotion. And
yeah.
also we've identified art as well as being, not just like a painter who's somebody who paints, but art is like an umbrella that under it, each person might have different mediums through which they channel their creativity, right? So for you, it's music, it's fire, it's dance, it's videography, it's animation. You have all these different spokes of the umbrella of like art and creativity. And someone else, people I hear deny themselves, like, oh, I'm not an artist, because
Yeah.
what they're doing is something with healing. They're doing something like they're a yoga teacher, they're a nurse, they're this, they're that. And to them, that's just not art. That's not creativity. But to me, I still see those fitting under the umbrella of art as well. They're just different mediums, and everybody is going to work those mediums in a different way. Um, and I love what you were saying as well, because what was coming up for me is vulnerability as an artist, right? When we are in that act of creation and we're making something, we're kind of tapping into some of the most sometimes vulnerable places of ourselves. It could
Mm,
be whatever it is. It might be, there's strong sometimes emotion tied into it for us. There's things happening in our life, and we're working through a process, and through that, we're using a medium to let that energy either complete itself and then create, or we're in the act of creation, but it's vulnerable. So when we put it out there, when we get on stage, when we put out our art, when we put out our program, our song, then there's this kind of vulnerable component to it. I have a couple of different questions brewing in here about that. And there's kind of something with validation, because I've heard in, like at least my students is the one place that I would say this is, I get people performing very soon, and before they're ready, really, before they feel ready, like they're totally ready. But, I'm again, like, let's just do it and learn as we go, right? It's a safe space to do this. But sometimes people are creating because they're looking for that validation back. Right. So what do you have? It's like they might make something so that somebody's like, oh, I really love that. It's going to invoke a response in someone, but they're kind of needing that validation back in the creation. And when they don't get it, or when it's not liked, then, or they're kind of feeling this sense of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not perfect, it's not good enough. And you mentioned something about perfection. So I guess where I'm going with this is this concept of validation, vulnerability, and perfection, and how that comes into play either for you or what you have to say about that in the artistic creative bubble.
Wow. Another great saying is that perfection is the enemy of good. 'Cause you can hide in perfectionism, like it's never done, it's never done, it's never done. No, no, I'm not going to show it to anybody because it's not done, it's not perfect, right? That can be an endless spiral of insecurity because what's what's perfect? And there's just no answer to that, which is why you can hide behind it forever. Validation is a funny thing. Because as an artist, you can create something authentically and maybe you're happy with it or you're like it's perfect. It's everything that it needs to be or that I wanted it to be. And you put it out there and you understand that it'll be what it's going to be. For some people, like, oh, this is so, this is so meaningful to me. It reminds me of this, moment that I had in my life. And then other people can be very dismissive of it. But if the reason you are making it, I mean, we put our art out into the world and we hope that it will affect the world in a positive way. And sometimes that positive way comes from people not liking it. Sometimes we make ugly art in order to shock people into paying attention to something that they've been ignoring. So you put your art out into the world, hoping that in some way it will make the world a better place. Maybe it'll make people happier. Maybe you know, it'll be something that people find emotionally useful, or maybe it'll shock people into being a better person, whatever. But and there can be validation in that, right? You can sit back and you can see how people react to it. You can see how maybe it creates some ripples, and you can deserving of patting yourself on the back and saying, okay, well, good for me. I did this not for the validation, but it's also nice to see that there's a place for my work in the world. It's not just a thing, it's out there making ripples, affecting people. But when you sit down at a blank canvas, or you sit down, with your manuscript book open and your piano ready to go, and you're like, I'm gonna write a hit song because I want everybody to think of me as a big hit songwriter or a big star or whatever. The reason I'm creating this work is because I want people to view me in a certain way. I think that is a flawed approach, and it's promoted by business people, right? Art is art, business is business. Sometimes people confuse those two. There is the business of making money off of art, but that's still business. That is not the art itself. And from a business perspective, writing something that you have strong belief that people are going to like it, well, okay, there's business value in that approach. But artistically, sitting down with the intention of creating something where, I don't even know how to say this, your motivation isn't to explore or isn't to be authentic necessarily, you're trying to manufacture something, that starts to stray dangerously far from my own definition of art, because the creator's motivation is also key to what is art. It's a funny conversation. It goes all the way back to when I was in college. I used to hang out with buddies. I was a music major. We'd sit around. What is art? What is art? As college students, we all would talk about this stuff. And motivation plays into it. And I'm maybe not quite as hardcore as some people are, like, oh, you're a commercial hack. Again, different people have different perspectives on your work. Some people might look at it and say, you're a sellout, that's just commercial. You just wrote that because you wanted to make more money. And it may even be true that that was some of your motivation, but it can still be art. There can still be authenticity there. There can still be creativity there. But when you start off with a primary motivation of creating something that is going to affect the world in this one very specific way, and your plan that everybody's going to like it, or I don't know, it's too narrow of an approach from my own experience.
Yeah.
There are lots of people, and some of them even call themselves, I'm a commercial artist, which is to say I only make stuff that I believe people are going to like enough to buy. They like it enough that they're going to spend money on it. And that's a thing. And it's a great way to feed yourself, which is a problem that a lot of artists have. But it's a very narrow approach. It's a difficult tightrope to walk, I think.
And I'm feeling like, based on what you're saying, one, I'm hearing the word motivation. It's like checking our motivation as an artist. But I also feel like what I'm hearing is there's this very fine line between like artist and creativity to like business person marketing. And they can overlap, because an artist can be also a business person and a business person can be an artist. But like I've seen examples of, people who are making the art and turning it into a business versus somebody who is like not at all having anything to do with the creative side of it at all. And they're just creating art for the purpose of making a business. Like, I'm going to make these t-shirts and I'm going to build this image and put these images on these t-shirts and build a whatever cafe press store and whatever it is these days, and then sell like all this stuff like yoga mats. But I have no connection to it whatsoever. Right. And I think that is what I'm hearing you say, that fine line.
No connection to it. That's good. Actually, is there a line? I think there is, though I can't define it. Is there a line between creation and manufacturing? Hotel art. I've seen some beautiful art in hotels. I mean, like, wow, this is like way better than you expect to see in a corporate hotel. But a lot of hotel art, there's no doubt in my mind that the artist was told, make something that's non-representative, that won't offend anybody. And that is hard to take that motivation, fit it into my own personal definition of art, right? Because if your goal is to not affect people, then how do you call it art? It takes up space. It's more interesting than a blank wall, but there needs to be more humanity in it, for my own personal definition of art. But then again, the person making money off of creating hotel art, hopefully they're making a living off of that. That's a great thing. I don't know that I personally could find a whole lot of enjoyment or fulfillment from just doing that, but I don't know. I mean, that's just not me. I don't do that. I don't write the same song over and over again. My live performances are all varied enough that there's always the go with the flow moment. 2 nights in a row, I can perform at the same location to the same music, and those two shows are not the same. There's just so much wiggle room in my performance style that they're always going to be different, and that's important to me, the way that I find satisfaction in the process.
I have a good example right now of what you're, I think it's a good example of what I think I'm hearing you say is I'm thinking about the Grateful Dead and how they played the same music all of the time, but good luck finding two recordings and all of the tapers in all the years that sound exactly alike. Like, from vocal tone to the way they played it, to the length of the song, to everything, it was constantly different. Even though it was the same lyrics, it was the same song, and everybody knew it, it ultimately, from show to show, was completely different.
Right.
And it was obvious. It wasn't like, wow, they're so good at it that you can't, like, to the average person, they can't hear it. No, everybody can tell there's a drastic difference.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can only assume that for those musicians, that was an important part of their self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
Some performers' self-expression is more subtle. And then I have seen some shows that I was just like, that was so much, that was so much like the last show that I saw. It's not that there's not self-expression there, but it just seems like it's like frozen or something. I mean, that's what a recording is. The recording of a song, it is a frozen moment. Every time you listen to that recording, it will be the same thing. And that might be what you want, but that is just that one snapshot of that form of expression versus, hearing the person sing the song different each time. That's closer to what I would call kind of a dynamic form of self-expression. I mean, it's really tied to medium. You paint a picture, and every time I look at your picture, it's going to be the same unless I light it differently or something like that. In that medium, it's not a live medium, though there is performance art, versions of painting.
And if you apply your technique, if you apply what we talked about earlier with pattern interrupt on that example of like looking at the same photo, like this piece of art behind me, like I could look at this every single day and think, oh yeah, there's a piece of art. But if I then catch myself and pull back and start to look at it, then I start seeing things in it that I had never considered before. So sometimes
Okay.
having like something steady helps us be able to pattern interrupt and see where we could actually view things a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's really valid. I like that point of view. I like that a lot because, I'm gonna have to mull that over. Thank you. I'm gonna think about that because I'm a recording artist. I write songs, but I also record my own songs. And I have to admit, once it's done, once I've decided this is done, I don't go back and listen to those songs very often. And I think it's because of my own bias that I feel like, well, that was a frozen moment. That was then, this is now. I would much rather play the song on my guitar, sit here and experience that than I would to listen to the recording again. But maybe I'll go back and listen to some of my old recordings and see if I have a little glimpse of who I was when I made that. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe it's like a glimpse of who you were when you made it, but it also could be like looking at it from the perspective of where you are. You might notice things in it that you had never even recognized before because you're a different person now. You're coming from a different, vantage point at this point. When I then sometimes revisit those old recordings or those old videos that I took of stuff and I look at it, I start seeing things that I hadn't really noticed before because I was so in it at the time, and now I'm at a different point. So I gain like a different perspective. And, so it's just worth exploring, I think, as an artist. Like, art is about perception, right?
Hmm.
Perspective, perception. And you said strong emotions. And, so just being able to shift ourselves around and look at it from different ways and consider, is it going this way, is it going this way, is it going this way, I'm tracking with poi, like how is it moving and what are our patterns and how can we like shift it to be able to perceive it a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Yeah, but when we're in it, sometimes it's hard to like really see it. We've got to get out of it a little bit and make some space between it.
Right. And the analytical mind oftentimes doesn't play well with flow state. Like at least for me, my analytical mind is probably the biggest culprit at pulling me out of flow state. But we need both. Both are a good thing. It's just that sometimes they don't play well together.
Right. Yeah, I'm feeling into people who might be watching this, or they're not recognizing, not making the connection with their creativity, and
Mhm.
maybe they're more in analytical mind, and they're trying, they've heard about the flow state, and they want to get to the flow state, but they're sort of like, I don't know what that even feels like. I think I felt the flow state. What does that even look like? I don't know. Do you have anything to say regarding that?
Yeah. The thing that comes up in my head is how many people I like to connect with an audience after a show, get close to them, and see them eye to eye. If it's a fire show, I like to light people's hands on fire. It's just kind of that final interaction. But the thing that I've heard so many times that I've bounced around in my head endlessly, people who look on with amazement and admiration, and what comes out of their mouth is, I could never do that. But you can hear in the tone, of their voice, amazement and admiration and gratitude. You know, they're expressing like they're thanking me, they're thanking the performance for this experience that they weren't expecting, you know, that amazed them. But immediately there's a part of their mind that says, but you could never do that. And and I think a lot of times that's kind of like a version of imposter syndrome, which is there's a part of them that is so amazed that they're starting to feel what could only be called inspiration. Like, I want to do something amazing. I want to go out and do something. And kids have no problem with this. Kids look at the world and they're constantly amazed by what they see, and they're constantly just wired to try and imitate and to try and create, and they just find joy in it. And then at some point, we lock that away and we tell ourselves, oh, I couldn't do that. It's amazing that you can do that. And I'm so glad that I was able to, you know, experience your creative process, but I could never do that. And why would they say that? I think they say that is because that is what a voice inside their head is telling them. That voice, that careful voice is saying, don't think that you're going to go home and do this. You know, you belong in the audience. That's what you need to express. And I think that's unfortunate. But it's drilled into us. I mean, I've certainly felt that, but maybe more than a lot of people, I see shit and I'm like, ooh, I'd like to try that. You know, I mean, that's what happened with fire dancing. That's how I got into music in the first place. I think all of my preferred mediums all started off that way. I saw something that excited me and amazed me, and my reaction was, I want to learn how to do that. I want to figure that out. I want to try it. Um, and I've done that enough that I've learned to enjoy the creative process. I could be a little better at allowing myself to be a beginner at things. I do sometimes fall into that trap of like, you know, trying something new, and I have these high, you know, these great ideas, and then, you know, you don't have the skill set, so it's a lot harder than you think it is. But at least give it a try and see if it might still fuel your inspiration, because it takes a lot to get good at anything. And at least give yourself the opportunity to try, and not even necessarily try and fail, just try and struggle. Like, there is no failure until you give up, right? Like, the rest of the time you're struggling. You try it and it's hard. You hit yourself in the head, or you don't sing on pitch, or whatever it is. You don't understand how to get that shade of green out of your paints. But allowing yourself to flail around and make a mess is an incredible, it's a necessary step to learning, you know, and developing your own creativity. Let yourself be messy. It's okay. Even, you know, like you were saying, you oftentimes like motivate your students early in their career, their process, their education. Get out there and perform, because it's a whole different environment than spinning by yourself at home or even spinning with your friends in the park. And it is kind of an accelerant, you know, getting up there and performing in front of an audience and letting yourself be only as good as you are, and then congratulating yourself for having the guts to do it and realizing you didn't get hurt. You know, like the mob didn't come at you with torches and pitchforks. And maybe you're not happy with some of the stuff that you did, but still, there's tomorrow, and there's next weekend, and there's the next show. And each time you do get better.
Yeah, we have to be willing to make the mistakes and to create anyways and to put ourselves out there, and it's going to feel vulnerable and we're going to feel insecure. And, you know, honestly, with the imposter syndrome and with, you know, what you describe with that, what really comes up for me is like feeling like worthy, or like it's like I'm not worthy of that. It's like when you said with the audience, how people are like, I could never do that,
Mm,
and they're kind of like pushed down. It's sort of like, well, you're really amazing, but I'm not really that amazing. So like,
right.
therefore, I'm not really, I don't know if it's worth, but it's something like that kind of, I'm not really good enough for that. I'm not really that cool. I'm not really that creative. I'm not really, it's always these I'm not something is living in that space, right?
Right.
And that's gonna live there, right? And so, but we've got to find something within us to create anyways, to explore anyways. And I mean, my early fire shows were the most horrendous thing that anybody, like, they're horrible. Like anybody can go to my
High
YouTube
five.
channel. Yeah, like I've got them on YouTube before YouTube was even like a thing. Some of those are up there, and it's like, what is this exactly? Like, but I want to, before we kind of bring this to round this in somewhere, so we've talked a lot about like fire dancing, we've talked about like imposter syndrome, and we've talked about like the creative flow. But I think as we're on this thread of like imposter syndrome, I want to talk a little bit about music and musical arts, because I don't consider myself a musician. It's not, I'm a dancer, and I like music is what gives me life, right? So when music comes as a dancer, like I start expressing and moving, and that's how I come alive from the rhythm. But I have been deeply connected to brilliant musicians, like, well, one brilliant musician, and you're also a very good musician as well. And I'm kind of thinking about that person a little bit, and the insecurities and the hiding behind, like, it was like how it blocked them from really growing, because he was really good, but there was this sort of like timid insecurity, this like hiding in there. And I think I've seen this a lot with musicians specifically, where there's like, they can be really brilliant and amazing, but there's some deep insecurities that are, and some like really deep core wounds that are in there.
Mm.
Even though what they're creating is like, as a dancer, I could say, wow, like that's really brilliant, right? But they don't know that. What, as a musician, what can you say about that on the thread of what we're talking about?
Well, part of it, I think, comes back to perfection is the enemy of good. Um, there are definitely aspects of music which are very formalized, which isn't to say formulaic, but when you talk about rhythm and pitch according to, our Western standards of this is the scale and these are the notes and these are the rhythms available to you. So it's easy to get locked into that wasn't right. That wasn't what I intended. And the more time you spend not performing in an audience, the easier it is to get trapped in that microscopic point of view.
Mm.
You get in front of an audience, and at first it's, difficult, it's terrifying or whatever, and you make a mistake and you're like, I hate myself. But then the more mistakes you make in front of your audience, hopefully not so many mistakes that the audience hates you, but I mean, eventually you come to realize they don't perceive your music the way that you do, the way your inner critic does. Um, and and then you start to realize, you start to learn, like, okay, there's music is part of the performance, but it's not all of the performance, right? And audiences want a lot more than just a perfect rendition of music, more than music they've never heard or more than music that they know very well. There's much more to it. And that actually gives you more leeway, as not having to play it perfectly, not having to play it exactly as they might expect it. Or there's an old joke among jazz players. It's just like, if you make a mistake, if you hit a bad note, play that note two more times, and then it's not a mistake anymore. It's like, I meant to do that, right? Because it's art, it's expression, and it may not be what people expect, but a part of art is also surprising people. Um, Perfectionism. Oh, and the other thing about music is because audio recording has been a medium for so long. well, you call it 100 years, more than that, but for at least 100 years, people have been listening to music coming out of speakers. And the music typically that you hear coming out of your radio or your, you know, whatever, your CD player, your podcast, it's music that's been recorded meticulously, usually by the cream of the crop musicians. It is the best of the best of the best. And that's what we've grown up listening to. So it's easy to be intolerant of anything that isn't exactly the way you expect it to be. That's not the nature of live music. Live music is a whole different medium, and you have to let that get into your head. Every recording you've ever listened to, with the exception of, you know, live recordings, and even some of those live recordings have been doctored. Every song that's been recorded in a studio, there have been overdubs and multiple takes and splicing things together. It's not reality. For that matter, four people in a room playing instruments don't sound anything like the music you hear coming out of Spotify. It's a very different medium, just the way that sound works in a space as opposed to the way that sound is recorded. So perfectionism is just such an illusion. You know, we base our sense of perfectionism on this recording medium that is in and of itself an illusion. Um, I say five people, you know, a five-person band, put them in a studio and record a song the way that music is recorded these days. Take those five people, put them on a stage, and have them play it. Even if they're the best musicians trying their best to sound exactly the same, it's not going to sound exactly the same. It shouldn't. You shouldn't have that expectation. So I think that is part of the trap of perfectionism, is you base your ideal on an unfair comparison.
Yeah, and it's like I'm hearing you say it's kind of like the outward expression of it rather than the internal like feeling of it.
Yeah.
You know, again, as a dancer, when I'm moved by a piece of music or song, vocal, whatever, it's rarely a recording that I'm, sometimes it's a recording, but usually when I'm in the element of like the live instrument and I can feel like
Mm,
the musician's energy going into the music, that's
right.
when I feel it as moving as a dancer. But I can hear lots of music that I'm just like, oh, 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 like no, you know, but when I can actually feel that energy that went into it, even if it's in a recording, I can feel that, and then that's what actually moves me. um yeah, and I'm hearing that like in a little bit of what you're saying. It's like the recording, I kind of lost my train of thought with that, so I'm just gonna leave it.
With any art form, I mean, what we really want is to connect with the humanity. And some art forms, we do that in funny ways. You know, non-representational art, sometimes people will look at it and they say, I don't understand it, but it makes me feel a certain way. And people will say, well, there's no humanity in this art. There's nothing I can, you know, grab onto. But if it makes you feel something, there's humanity in that art.
Mhm.
Because that's what we respond to. We know that a person made that, you know. Um, this is just, we're wired to want that. At least most of us are. I was just gonna say, I think it's rare that people are not affected by most forms of art. Like I said, positive or negatively, you know, almost the biggest insult you can give to an artist is to just like, oh, that's beneath me. That's not even worth recognizing, you know? Be affected by it. You can like it, you cannot, but don't ignore it, you know?
Yeah, that actually, I thought about this as well, is as an artist, we need an audience, we need a witness, right? It's like, and I mean, I guess I want to be careful with the word need, because like the art creation is for us, but it's like, you know, I could paint all these pictures and build all these like fire dance shows and make all this stuff and then just chill out here in my space being like, this is super cool, right? But like ultimately, there's a point where you said, you know, the art, we make it, and then it's not about us at that point. It's got to go and
Hmm.
do its thing. And you know, it just, it's not meant to just stay here. Some of it, I mean, some of it might stay in our space and be for our own musing, I guess, but you know, For me, shows, not at all. Like, I'm not going to build a show just for the sake of me building it for myself at all. Like, it's absolutely about other people.
Mhm.
And the only reason I'm going to perform or create or build a show is for that reason. So it needs an audience, it needs a place for it to be expressed. Um, you know. Mhm.
And it is really gratifying when you find your audience. You know, people who are affected in a positive way by your art. Because there are always going to be people who aren't affected or aren't affected in a positive way, and you know, that can be challenging for the artist. But there are people out there. The question is like, can you find them and can they find you? That's the most mysterious part of the equation, honestly.
So I think I want to like to kind of bring this around a little bit. I want to ask you, so we've had like the fire has been a major part, the music and the fire, all of it's been a major part of it. But I know that over, 20 plus years, the fire really took the main scene of it all,
Hmm.
right? And I know that there hasn't been as much fire. There's like the fire is going through its transformation. Shows are going through their transformation. I guess our lives are going through their transformation for whatever it is. There are not 500 shows a year anymore, and I'm partly grateful because I don't know that I can handle that. But like ultimately, uh, so sometimes creativity, the mediums through which we channel our art, our creativity also transforms.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what's on the rise for you? What's coming up? Where are you at with all this as this is going through its transformation?
Well, I'm actually kind of coming back around. Right now, the last couple of years, my focus has been on recording my huge backlog of songs. So I was a musician before I was a fire dancer, and then fire dancing kind of took over my life. And I did a lot of traveling, but I always would drag my old acoustic guitar around. And over, the course of 15, 20 years, I still kept writing songs, and I would write them, and I would write them down, maybe make a sloppy little recording of them, and then I'd put them away. And after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, all the live shows stopped, and I realized the best thing I could do to myself would do for myself, since I could no longer connect with an audience, would be to take a step back and look at all of that. I don't have a word for it, but the music that I wrote that was sitting there in seed form, right? It was in my head, it was in my heart, it was on this piece of paper. Can I plant this and can I grow this into something that I can share with people? And recording it was the obvious approach to that. In the last few years, I've been recording, and then it becomes obvious I'm still at heart a performer. But like we talked about, perfectionism being the enemy of good, I have developed some doubts about my live performance ability. So this last year, actually, I've kind of slowed my recording process and really been focused on, I have a great voice teacher, and she's helping me. My voice has changed in 20 years. You think about, oh, you're 12 years old and your voice changes, and that's a really obvious and dramatic way. But over the course of my life, my voice has changed, and I'm learning how to sing with the voice that I have today. I'm, brushing off those guitar playing chops and all the stuff that goes along with performing music live. And I'm pretty excited about it. I'm going out and doing the occasional open mic and getting in front of audiences and singing in front of people and getting some positive reinforcement. And I'm looking forward to looking people in the eye while I perform, but not just with fire, but actually singing lyrics that I've written about something that's important to me, knowing that at least some of them will find something in those lyrics that's important to them, you know?
Is there anywhere that you are playing soon where somebody might be able to come watch you? Like where, if somebody was going to come listen to you play live, where you been playing at?
Well, I'm living in Marin, the North Bay. Let's talk globally. Here in California, the San Francisco Bay Area, I live in Marin, which is just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. The places that I am playing currently and in the foreseeable future are um, the the Red Rock Cafe is this little barbecue place that has live music all the time. Up in Novato is Hop Monk, which they have a lot of professional acts that play there, but they also have an open mic on Wednesdays. Live music is coming back to life here. It's been a few years since the worst of the pandemic, and live shows are coming back to life, and those are a couple of the places that I'm performing at. It's inevitable. I'm going to start connecting with some people. I already am connecting with some people that I think I'm going to get together with, and if not form a band, put the band back together. At least I'm going to start performing with other musicians in a kind of casual environment. I know what it's like to be on a schedule and travel and tour and perform, and there's pros and cons to that. I'm not sure that I'm feeling that right now. I don't have the urge to go, like you say, do 500 shows in a year. Um, that's not what I want to do right now, but I wouldn't mind getting to the point where I'm doing 100 shows a year with, other musicians that I admire and enjoy working with,
Mhm.
and singing songs, both my own and, music by other people, music that people find familiar and comforting and exciting. Um, Music has a way of taking us back to a time and a place. Uh, so I think I'll probably be doing some more cover songs as well.
Okay, awesome. And are you going to continue recording as well? Because I know you've put some stuff on your YouTube channel and you have a
Hmm.
couple songs on there. Are you going to keep adding some stuff to your YouTube channel or recording?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a song right now that I'm working on that I got a little bogged down on because I wrote the song and then I never really sang it or performed it. I never performed it. This particular song, I think there are maybe two people on the entire planet who have ever heard this song. Well, three if you count me. And when it came time to record it, I realized that I didn't quite know how to sing it. It's in a range that I wasn't really comfortable with. I like it. I like the melody. I hear it in my head. And my options were, well, I could get somebody else to sing this song, which I've done before, or I can learn how to sing this song myself, which, like I said, this last year I've been working with a wonderful vocal coach and learned so much about how to sing beyond just the way that I've done it instinctively. I've got this kind of gruff rock and roll voice that I kind of instinctively always gravitated to. One, because I can hear myself sing on a loud stage, and two, it was just kind of, I liked it. I like gruff rock and roll, but not all songs are appropriate for gruff rock and roll. So I'm learning to be more flexible with my voice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that will be the next song that I get recorded. Hopefully, I'm going to give myself probably another month and a half. I think I can have this thing done. I'm ready to sing it now.
Yeah, and you made the intro and the outro and the little intermediate things in this podcast as well. So people have already heard and been exposed to some of your creativity and your music already.
Yeah, yeah, I've actually written quite a bit of incidental music for small production films, for other podcasts. Music is everywhere. It's easy to just take it for granted. If you strip music out of all the places you hear it, the world gets very quiet. So I have found a lot of opportunities to write instrumental music for different kinds of media, and that's its own kind of fun. That's its own kind of medium. Um, Going back to, like I was saying, there's commercial music or commercial art. When you sit down to, like, someone once asked me, I want you to write a mermaid song for me, and I was a little lost. I was just like, I don't think I have a mermaid in me. How am I supposed to, like, write a mermaid song? It all seemed very external. It didn't make sense to me. But there came a moment. There came a particular bit of the melody that all of a sudden it just blew up inside me. And it became real and it became art and it became beautiful. I'm still very proud of that song. It's a song that I got somebody else to sing. Um, but that was another example of, getting out of your norm, getting out of your rut, trying something that maybe seems impossible. I could never do that. I could never write a mermaid song. Well, of course you can. So.
Yeah, so if somebody, and I know we didn't really talk a lot about the video component of it, but I know you also do a lot with video work as well. But if someone sees this, listens, sees, watches this podcast, and they have a like creative project, you're available to work with people on sound, video, animation,
Mhm.
creative projects, right?
Yeah, and I don't advertise myself in those mediums. It's more, most of the work I get is kind of word of mouth or through Fiverr, that sort of thing. It's almost kind of anonymous doing that kind of work. But I mean, you can always reach me through my website, darrellstblaine.com, or look me up on YouTube. You see well, you hear both my music and some of my animation work there. Certainly anybody's welcome to contact me and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. Are you interested? What could you do? I love hearing about other people's projects. Um, and whether it might be something I could contribute to or not, I still love hearing about other people's projects.
One last thing too that I think is worth saying is you're a phenomenal teacher also. And I know you're not necessarily teaching music or teaching stuff, I don't think, are you?
No, I'm not sure I have the confidence to do that. But anyway, go ahead. Thank you for saying
Yeah,
that.
I was just thinking like it's like regardless whether it's like performing. I mean, I've learned a lot from you from performing for sure. Like I became a better performer from learning how to be a better performer from you. And like you're
Thank
one of
you.
those people that was very instrumental in that. And but also with sound, like it's that, with the sound components and like video and with all these other things, you just know so much, but you have a natural teaching composure or teaching ability that's just kind of in there. And I'm just wondering if you have really, you said it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. Is that what you said? Or you're not as
Well,
confident?
I mean, and it might be because music I mentioned before is very formalized in a lot of ways. Like, teaching music. When I think of teaching music, I think of what, most music teachers sort of do. And I probably wouldn't be inclined to put myself in that position because I do what I do. Um, and I never really occurred to me to try to teach somebody how to do what I do. But from a coaching point of view, I like the word coach
You
more
said it.
than teacher because if someone came to me and said, oh, I'm getting started writing music and here's something that I'm doing, I would enjoy hearing their work. And if they wanted feedback about the process or inspiration, all the kinds of things that we've talked about, you can certainly go more in depth with that sort of thing with another person. And it's not even so much teaching that like, oh, I'm going to give you this big secret. Sometimes we all just need to bounce ideas off of somebody else. To say something out loud to somebody we know understands
Mhm.
can be really valuable. So I have worked in that capacity before. And again, it's mostly word of mouth. It's people who see what I'm doing, see or hear what I'm doing, and a conversation starts up. It hasn't been that often that it turns into a long-term like coaching relationship with me. They tend to be kind of shorter sessions, more specific. But I do find it interesting because the creative process is infinitely variable and infinitely fascinating.
Yeah.
And
And a
I
creative
love.
coach can cover all of the different things, like, because basically, if I'm thinking about today's conversation, we touched on a few different mediums, but ultimately the overarching bit was creativity and
Mhm.
artistry, right? And just like art as in a form of creativity. And I definitely can see like when you say the coaching capacity as like a creative coach, like you having these epic skills with like being able to work with people and carrying their creativity to a place beyond imposter syndrome, like beyond perfection, like being able to like explore new doorways within where they're stuck, when they're stuck in a block, or they think they can't create, or they're stuck on a song, or they're in a groove. And you have shared today all of these tools that are just brilliant tools for that crossover into so many different mediums. So
So all they need to do is watch this podcast.
and start contacting you to be a creative coach. Like, say, like, it's interesting. Like, I didn't expect that really to come forward, but it seems so obvious actually. Okay, is there anything that I have not asked you that you would like to talk about, share, or express in this moment?
Um, I was going to show you my cat, but I guess she left. This is my, some people would call it a man cave. I just call it my studio. But I have had a home studio for music since I was in my 20s, you know, and every time I moved, I rebuilt it to fit, you know, um, where I live and what I can afford. And I'm very fortunate to have this now. I have pieces that I've made and pieces that I've purchased for years and years and moved from house to house, and I'm really happy with it. And creating your own safe place, your own safe creativity place, it can't be undervalued. And as far as the aesthetic goes, I think what really ties in, I don't know if you can tell in this recording, but it's a very quiet place. You know, you don't hear my voice echoing around. It's very focused and quiet. And when it came to create the aesthetic, I realized bright and airy. I kind of like it dark and moody. It goes with the sound of the room, if that makes any sense. And that's just my own personal taste. You know, I know some people would much rather have like a big bright skylight and stuff like that, and that's fine.
Okay, so yeah, so you wanted to show your cat, but your cat has disappeared and you don't want to go find her?
Yeah, she's hiding behind my equipment rack because it's warm back there. All the electricity keeps her warm. But she's kind of my familiar these days. Like it's rare. In fact, most of the people I know refer to this house as Biscuit's house. Biscuit's my cat. You know, they don't say, "Oh, you want me to drop you off at your place?" They'll say, "Should I drop you off at Biscuit's place?" And I'll be like, "Yeah." That's fine. Most of my neighbors know my cat's name, and very few of them know my name. So I'm happy to live in her shadow.
That's awesome. The cat, you called your place a man cave. It could be the cat man cave.
Well, she actually doesn't spend a whole lot of time in here. I was surprised that she came in here today. I thought maybe she'd want to make an appearance, but I guess she just wanted to listen in, make sure that I wasn't talking shit about her or anything.
Well, she might be back there controlling you. Like she's back
Maybe
there.
pulling my strings.
Yeah, she's back there like, you're gonna say this next. You're gonna say this next. All right. Well, thank you for appearing and conversating and sharing all of your wisdom and amazing here on the Ring of Fire podcast. And hopefully it's ignited the creative spark in at least just one person, but maybe more.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I will see you soon.
Okay.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye.